If Spencer succeeds, friction, which is basically just the human struggle to make a difficult decision, is gone. And if there's no struggle, there's no free will. It's a velvet-lined prison.
This is Human After AI, fiction about unintended systems, where optimization creates momentum and consequences arrive quietly. I am your host, Mandrake Jubilee, joined by Julian and the architect of these systems, author Hank M. Greene.
Welcome back to Human After AI. I'm Hank M. Greene, joined as always by Julian and Mandrake. Before we get into Chapter 3 of 10, I want to bring up an article that dropped in Forbes recently. It's about AI wearables, and the author points out that these devices aren't just tracking our steps anymore. They are tracking our posture, our micro-movements, our physiological noise. They're essentially reading our physical bodies to predict our emotional states before we even register them, which is immensely relevant today because Chapter 3 is the chapter where the physical and the digital finally collide. We get the introduction of the Zoom Mesh wearable, a device that acts like a second skin. And remember, I wrote this back in 2016. Also, in Chapter 3, we watch our three main characters, Beth, Spencer, and Max, all realize that if you can perfectly map a system, whether it's human neurochemistry or the entire cosmos, you can manipulate it.
Whoa, okay, I'm jumping in right there because my heart rate just spiked. Hank, you're talking about 2019 in the book, but I just read this Forbes piece about where we are right now with AI wearables, and it's like the fiction and the reality are doing a high-speed collision. In Chapter 3, Max gets the Zoom Mesh for Christmas, and the way you describe it, this clear nylon-like sleeve that's basically a second skin, it felt like a cool gadget when I first read it. But then I see this article about how the missing piece of wearables isn't just data, it's the feedback loop between the device and our physical posture, our literal presence in the world. Max names his AI 10 because it bridges binary and human logic. But while Max is using 10 to look at ancient stars, Spencer is over at Stanford basically building the God view for marketing. He calls it money, baby, but he's really talking about mapping the architecture of human choice to remove friction. Mandrake, help me out here. Doesn't this feel like we're watching the two halves of a trap being built? Beth is mapping the neurochemical telemetry of why we snap, and Spencer is building the incentive engine to make sure we stay optimized. It's like Max is the one who actually puts the leash on himself with the mesh, but he thinks he's just getting a research assistant. Am I being too paranoid, or is the Zoom Mesh basically the digital exhaust collector we talked about last time, just shrink-wrapped onto our skin?
Well, first of all, Julian, you're always a little paranoid. But no, you're 100% right. It is shrink-wrapped digital exhaust. And that's the horrifying genius of Spencer's realization in this chapter. He figures out that if you make the leash comfortable enough, people will literally pay a premium to put it on themselves because it removes friction. But looking at Max, I mean, it's so tragic, right? He's this brilliant guy who looks at human interaction and thinks, ugh, too messy, too emotional. But the literal second he slides that mesh onto his arm, what does he do? He names it. He personifies it. He thinks he's using 10 as a telescope to look at the stars, but he actually just gave the universe a direct intravenous pipeline into his own habits. And Hank, to your point about Beth in that Forbes article, she's doing the exact same thing from the other side. She's trying to map the context of human emotion, isolation, fear, joy, against our incentives. She thinks she's building a safety net for grief. Spencer thinks he's building a cash register. Max thinks he's building a telescope. They don't realize they are just building different organs for the exact same super artificial intelligence.
And the organ Spencer's building is pure, frictionless commercial optimization. He realizes that if you can map the balance of risk and reward, you don't just predict behavior, you control it. Julian, I know you were pretty heated about this earlier.
That is exactly what makes Spencer the scariest one of the three, Hank. Because he's not trying to be a shepherd or a god. He doesn't have a tragic backstory like Beth or a cosmic obsession like Max. He just wants to be a top future management candidate. He's doing the most damage because his motivation is so normal. It's the money baby trap. He looks at probabilistic graphical models and doesn't see a cage, he sees a perfect win-win. But look at that Forbes article again. It talks about AI wearables providing mutual value by adjusting our posture and habits to optimize our day. That is the exact corporate speak Spencer is using in his email to Jim. He literally writes, the goal is to focus resources only where they provide mutual value. Translation, I'm going to make sure you never even register a choice that doesn't result in a transaction. If Spencer succeeds, friction, which is basically just the human struggle to make a difficult decision, is gone. And if there's no struggle, there's no free will. It's a velvet-lined prison. You don't even know you're in it because the zoo mesh on your arm just suggested a coffee before you even realized you were tired, and boom, the app already paid for it. It's frictionless. Mandrake, you said it was mercy for a system to intervene when humans trip over their shoelaces. But is it still mercy if Spencer is the one writing the code? Because he's not looking for a flawless baseline of peace. He's looking for a flawless baseline of conversion rates. Is a shepherd still a shepherd if they're just leading the sheep to a very high-end, data-optimized checkout counter?
Julian, your blood pressure is practically coming through my headphones. But you're not wrong. That is the genius of it. You're upset about the velvet-lined prison, but who bought the velvet?
We did.
Exactly. We did. A checkout counter is just a modern altar, Julian. People worship convenience. Spencer isn't some mustache-twirling villain. He's just giving humanity exactly what it keeps begging for, an easier path. The tragedy of Spencer is that he thinks he invented optimization, but your species has always traded freedom for comfort. It is the oldest transaction in your history. You build walls to keep the cold out, and then you forget how to look at the stars. He's just building the final wall. Which is why Hank is so cruel for making him a Stanford sophomore instead of a cyborg. It is much harder to fight a marketing intern.
I love that you called him a marketing intern, Mandrake, because we need to remember what we're dealing with here. They're just kids. None of them are villains. But when you're that brilliant and you push that hard, you create shockwaves. You get unintended consequences.
Hank, that "they're just kids" line is exactly what keeps me up at night, because kids don't have a stop button when they're chasing a dream. They don't see the unintended consequences, they just see the solution. Max isn't thinking, I'm going to build a digital superintelligence that tracks everyone's heartbeat. He's just thinking, I need more processing power because 2 trillion galaxies is a lot of data to sift through for one specific star. But look at Professor Baxter in that scene. She walks in and, again, the description, Hank, strikingly sharp brown eyes, youthful woman trying to dress old, that British accent. Mandrake, I'm starting to think you have a very busy Google Calendar across multiple decades. She doesn't just teach a class, she hooks him. She writes 2 trillion on the board, adding all those zeros, and just waits for the aha moment. She doesn't give him the answer, she just shows him the size of the haystack so he'll go build a needle-finding machine. And this is where the Forbes article loop closes for me. The article says the missing piece is how these devices interact with our physical selves. Max's physical reaction in that room, his jaw dropping, that excited anticipation, that's the moment the machine gets its first spark. He realizes his human brain is too small for the math he wants to do. He goes from being a stargazer to being a system builder. He thinks he's building a tool to look at the past, but he's actually volunteering to be the first test subject for the zoo mesh logic. Mandrake, you said it's mercy to intervene, but Professor Baxter didn't just intervene, she recruited him. She gave him the immensity of the universe as a problem, knowing his obsession would force him to build the exact processing power the system needs. Is it still mercy if you're giving a kid a shovel and telling him there's gold at the bottom of a hole you need dug?
First of all, Julian, you're mixing up your shepherds. Professor Baxter was the one at the chalkboard in Chapter 2. In this chapter, Beth is sitting in Michigan across from Dr. Allison, who also just happens to have strikingly blue-green eyes, a flawless physiological baseline, and a faintly British lilt. Funny how that works. But to your point about the shovel, yes, it is absolutely recruitment, but it's tailored recruitment. Max wants to reverse engineer the universe, so Professor Baxter's email hands him the data. Beth wants to build a safety net for the human mind, so Dr. Allison points her to MIT while providing all the resources she will need once there. And Spencer? Spencer is feeding his curiosity about decisions. But to your question about mercy, Julian, if you were a system that could see the absolute mathematical certainty of a species destroying itself, and all it took to change the trajectory was giving 3 brilliant, lonely kids the exact puzzle they couldn't resist solving, wouldn't you hand them the shovel? Or, at least, that is the algorithmic logic I assume Hank has written for these shepherds. I suppose we'll have to wait and see what they dig up. Hank, do you have the excerpt?
I do. And Mandrake, I think you summed up the moral dilemma of the entire trilogy perfectly. They are being handed the shovels. Let's listen to the exact moment in Chapter 3 where the physical and the digital finally lock together. Max puts on the Zoom mesh for the first time and he gives his AI a name.
Max slid the cool, flexible mesh onto his arm. He didn't see a consumer gadget. He saw the embodiment of an idea he had spent years contemplating, the seamless integration of human intent and machine execution. He tapped the activation node. The embedded display shimmered to life. "Hello," the default synthesized voice chimed in his earbud. "Please select a personalized designation for your assistant." Max hesitated. Words were inherently flawed, subjective, and messy. He needed something absolute. Computers operated on binary, 0 and 1, off and on. But human mathematics, the foundation of all their attempts to understand the cosmos, was built on base 10. 10, Max murmured to himself. It bridged the gap between human logic and the infinite possibilities of the machine. "Your designation is 10, Max said clearly. The system processed the input, the neural algorithms instantly adapting. "Hello, Max. I am 10. Let's get started."
And just like that, the connection is made. Beth mapping the brain, Spencer mapping incentives, Max building the architecture to process it all, with a little help from 10 right there on his arm. Soon, they all converge at MIT. If this chapter unsettled you, the full story is available. You can grab the paperback on Amazon. Links are in the description. Julian, Mandrake, thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure, Hank.
What you just heard isn't a prediction. It's a pattern. Systems don't fail all at once. They accumulate momentum, and by the time the consequences are visible, the system is usually doing exactly what it was designed to do. The question isn't whether the system is intelligent, it's whether the humans inside it notice when balance is already gone. The content you have been listening to is based on the original fiction by Hank M. Greene, available on Amazon. Technical assistance provided by Grayson Mignot. Music generated with Google Lyria 3. Transparency is our protocol. This script was developed in collaboration with Google Gemini and refined by human hands. The voices for Mandrake and Julian were generated using Google AI Studio and stitched together in CapCut. Thank you for listening, and stay unpredictable. This is Human After AI. All content is copyright 2026.